Life changed forever on that rainy evening. The car crash took my parents from me in an instant. While I survived, my legs were badly damaged, confining me to a wheelchair. During those dark times, Mary, my fiancée, stood by me like a beacon of hope. She helped me through 3 years of painful rehabilitation until I finally learned to walk again. But fate had other plans. That evening in the company parking lot opened my eyes to a harsh truth. I watched silently as Mary stepped out of a car with my cousin, their closeness speaking volumes. They thought they were alone, sharing intimate moments and discussing their plans to take over my company shares. The empty parking lot, with no security in sight, felt like a stage where their betrayal played out perfectly. I had come to surprise them with news of my recovery, but instead received the shock of my life. Their hushed conversation revealed this wasn't new. They had been plotting behind my back for months, maybe years. Despite facing many disappointments during my recovery, this betrayal cut deeper than any before. Instead of confronting them, I formed a different plan. I would methodically destroy the family business, leaving nothing but ruins. After ensuring complete bankruptcy, I would present Mary with two choices: a trip to the sunny beaches of Southeast Asia or a journey to witness the Great Migration in East Africa. The thought of her future desperation brought a calm smile to my face. That evening, I had my assistant drive me home. I sent Mary a simple message: "I am back home, waiting for you." Her reply came quickly, filled with fake excitement. She wrote about wanting to pick me up from the airport and promised to come home after handling some company matters. Reading her message, I felt a strange sense of peace. Her joy would be short-lived. The genuine feelings of love and trust I once had were replaced by a cold determination. As I sat in my living room, planning my revenge, I realized that sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't immediate confrontation, but patient, calculated action. Mary would soon learn this lesson the hard way. Mary rushed home that evening, likely eager to see how her plans would unfold. When she walked in and saw me still confined to my wheelchair, her shoulders visibly relaxed. She put on her practiced face of concern, asking about my health with what seemed like genuine care. If my assistant hadn't done such thorough research, I might have believed her act completely. I watched her move around me with her usual grace, playing my part perfectly. With practiced guilt in my voice, I said something I knew would shake her. I told her how well my rehabilitation was going, mentioning that the doctor expected me to walk again within 6 months. As she pushed my wheelchair, her hands trembled slightly. She covered it quickly, claiming excitement at the news, but I knew better. Soon after, Mary excused herself to the study. I stayed on the terrace, enjoying the warm sunlight while listening to her conversation through the hidden surveillance system I had installed throughout the house. Her phone call with Charles, my cousin, revealed everything I needed to hear. Their conversation painted a clear picture of their betrayal. Charles, my uncle's son, assured Mary that my recovery meant nothing. They had already undermined my position in the company. Once they had my shares, I would be powerless. Mary's relief was obvious in her voice as they started planning their next moves. The truth of what happened 3 years ago suddenly felt clearer than ever. Back then, I had been successfully running the family business. Everything changed on that fateful night of the business dinner with my parents. The car crash that took their lives also left me broken, or so everyone thought. Within a week of the accident, while I lay in the hospital bed, Charles had taken control of everything: my inheritance, the company, my life's work. The doctors had been pessimistic about my chances of walking again. Mary, who was only my girlfriend then, surprised everyone by staying. She played the role of the devoted partner perfectly, taking care of me with seeming tenderness and love. Now I understood why. She had been playing a long game with Charles from the start. As I sat there listening to them plan my downfall, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. My hidden cameras and surveillance systems had captured every secret meeting, every whispered conversation. While they thought they were being clever, they were actually walking right into my trap. The irony of it all almost made me laugh. They thought I was the trapped one, but soon they would understand just how wrong they were. The past 3 years played like a bitter movie in my mind. After the accident, I had become difficult to live with, lashing out at everyone around me. Yet Mary stayed, showing endless patience. She even proposed to me when I was at my lowest, turning our story into something that New York's elite loved to gossip about, the devoted woman who married a broken man. Now I knew it was all a perfectly staged performance. My thoughts were interrupted as Mary returned from her phone call. She carried a stack of financial papers, playing her part as the caring wife. She started explaining the company's performance over the years, pointing to charts and numbers she had carefully prepared. I had to admire her attention to detail. She had crafted her deception well. Before she could finish her presentation, I cut her off with a gentle wave. I told her I trusted her completely, that I hadn't had the energy to manage company matters while focusing on recovery. Then I dropped the bomb. I wanted to transfer all my shares to her. The shock on her face was priceless. She tried to hide it, but I saw how her hands trembled slightly as she held the papers. Those shares were the crown jewel, 30% of the Lu Group. They had once given me complete control of the company, the same company that had somehow been connected to my parents' death. The shares were the only significant asset I had kept separate from our joint marriage property. Now I was offering them to her on a silver platter. Mary couldn't believe her luck. She kept asking if something was wrong, her voice filled with fake concern. I smiled, reached out to stroke her hair, and asked if she loved me. Her answer came quickly, too quickly. Of course she loved me. I pulled her close, telling her how natural it was for a wife who had stood by me through my darkest times to love me so deeply. That's why I wanted to give her my best, my shares. Throughout this exchange, she maintained her loving smile, playing the role of the devoted wife perfectly. But inside, I was laughing at her performance. Since the day I lost the use of my legs, this woman had been counting down to the moment she could get her hands on my shares. Now that they were within reach, I could sense her anxiety, wondering if this was too good to be true, if there was a trap waiting. I reached for my phone and called my assistant. Within 30 minutes, they arrived at our home with a notary in tow. The time had come to set my plan in motion, and Mary's mask was about to crack. I watched calmly as the notary processed the share transfer agreement. The papers that Mary had been dreaming of for 3 years were now officially hers. Her eyes danced with poorly hidden excitement as she clutched the documents. She barely waited for the notary to leave before rushing to call Charles. They didn't even bother to lower their voices anymore. Their conversation floated clearly through my surveillance system. Charles laughed about how I doted on Mary, joking about how my face would look if I knew our marriage was fake. Then their talk turned darker. They planned to send me to reunite with my parents once the shares were secured. Their casual discussion of my death made me smile. The Heaven and Earth bank account I had opened would be perfect for their final destination. The truth about my past had taken shape during my 3 years of recovery. After my parents' accident, my grandfather had stripped me of my position as the Lu family heir. I still remember his hesitant expression that day. It had told me everything I needed to know. Something bigger was happening behind the scenes. While everyone thought I was focused on recovery abroad, I had been building a new company with people who remained loyal to me. It wasn't a large operation, but it gave me the resources to uncover the truth. Mary never suspected that while she played nurse, I was piecing together her betrayal. One of my most satisfying discoveries was about our marriage. Mary thought she was clever, but I had found out that our marriage certificate was nothing but a $9.90 online fake. We had never legally married. This meant I wouldn't be responsible for any debts they were about to incur. The irony of Mary's deception working in my favor almost made me laugh. The time had come to spring my trap. I sent a message to my assistant. Begin the arrangements. When they replied with concerns about my safety, I cut them off. Just make the arrangements. I'm leaving the country. They understood immediately. Some things were better handled from abroad, away from local restrictions and prying eyes. My dear Mary and Charles wanted my shares? I had given them exactly what they asked for. But like a poisoned chalice, these shares would bring them something very different from what they expected. The game was about to begin, and I had spent 3 years making sure I held all the winning cards. The words my grandfather spoke 3 years ago still rang in my ears. Even though he knew the car accident that killed my parents was suspicious, he had signed off on the accident report without hesitation. His explanation was cold and simple. George, right and wrong aren't always clear. Your weakness is the real problem. A cripple cannot lead the Liu family, and our company needs a new leader. I was still packing for my trip abroad when my phone buzzed with a new video. Mary had moved faster than I expected. The recording showed a celebration at the company, with Charles and Mary surrounded by the group's senior executives. Their true faces were finally on display. The executives fell over themselves praising Charles and Mary, calling them the saviors of the company. They laughed about how I had been nothing but a burden, collecting dividends while contributing nothing. Someone briefly mentioned being careful in case I found out, but their leader dismissed the concern with a laugh. What could a shareless, crippled man do to them now? Their mockery grew crueler as they joked about my future. They suggested I might end up cleaning bathrooms if Charles was kind enough to give me any job at all. The laughter in that room felt like acid in my veins, but it also confirmed what I needed to know. These were the same executives who had once sworn loyalty to my father. When I took over, they had worked tirelessly, proudly calling themselves the backbone of the Liu Group. Even after I lost my inheritance, they had sent messages promising eternal loyalty. Yet here they were, 3 years later, showing their true faces. The betrayal ran deeper than just the top executives. Even the middle managers, people my father and I had personally mentored, had turned their backs on me. They treated me like I had never existed, forgetting years of guidance and support we had given them. At first, my plan for revenge had seemed almost too harsh. I had felt moments of doubt, wondering if I was going too far. But watching this video, seeing their cruel celebration of my downfall, all hesitation vanished. They had earned everything that was coming to them. My revenge wouldn't just be justified, it would be poetic justice. The executives celebrating in that video had no idea they were actually filming evidence of their own betrayal. Soon they would learn that loyalty isn't something to be traded for profit, and power isn't something to be stolen without consequences. I put my phone away with a quiet laugh and continued packing. These traitors had sealed their own fate. They could follow Charles to their doom. Mary didn't come home that night, too caught up in her victory celebration to maintain her caring wife act. When she finally returned the next morning, she found me directing my assistant to load luggage into the car. Her confusion seemed genuine for once. When she asked what I was doing, I gave her my gentlest smile. I explained that my doctors wanted me to continue rehabilitation treatment abroad. I had to leave quickly, I told her, watching her face carefully. Then I added the perfect touch. Soon I would stand again, and she wouldn't have to face any more shame for being married to a cripple. Mary's face twisted slightly at my words. I could read her thoughts clearly. She preferred me in the country where she could control things. But she couldn't voice her real concerns without revealing her true nature. Instead, she forced a smile that looked more like a grimace, pretending to be overjoyed at the news of my potential recovery. I reached for her hand, asking her to drive me to the airport. I made it sound like a last request, saying it might be a long time before we saw each other again. She hesitated, but my steady gaze left her no room to refuse without seeming suspicious. This wasn't my original plan. At the airport, I turned to Mary with a calculated smile. Before I leave, Is there anything you want to tell me? I watched her face carefully, thinking about the blood debt that needed to be paid. 2 lives lost, 3 years of plotting. I wanted to see her mask crack, to glimpse the fear beneath her perfect act. But Mary's composure was impressive. After a brief moment of tension, she recovered, plastering on that practiced smile. "Take care and recover well," she said sweetly. "When you return, we'll have a beautiful baby together." I reached out to stroke her hair affectionately, while my eyes held a flash of deadly intent she couldn't see. As the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, I told her to be a good girl and wait for me at home. Walking through security with my assistant, I knew exactly what would happen next. My departure would make Mary and Charles nervous, pushing them to accelerate their plans. This was exactly what I wanted. Their rush would be their downfall. The news came quickly. The Lu Group called a board meeting to announce the share transfer. Since there were no immediate management changes, the market responded positively. The stock price soared. Everything was following Charles and Mary's carefully laid plans, making Mary the largest shareholder of the Lu Group. Her inauguration ceremony was a spectacle of false loyalty. The same executives and managers who had betrayed me now crowded around her, showering her with empty praise. "Under your leadership, the Lu Group will reach new heights," they gushed, their words dripping with artificial sweetness. Mary basked in their attention. Dressed in an expensive business suit, she carried herself with newfound authority. She was no longer just my wife, she was the president of the Lu Group. Her inaugural speech radiated confidence and power, painting the picture of a strong, capable leader. But her moment of triumph was about to shatter. The fear in her voice was delicious. The mighty Mary, reduced to pathetic denials. Little did she know, I had only begun to unravel their world. I ended the call with a soft laugh, telling Mary that paper couldn't hide fire forever. Over the next month, my assistant and I watched from afar as the Lu Group crumbled. Charles was forced to sell off his personal assets just to keep the company afloat. Their desperate scrambling was exactly what I had planned. When I decided it was time, I told my assistant to arrange our return to New York. Stepping back onto familiar ground stirred something in me. The mighty Lu Group had fallen far during my absence. They had become like a disease that everyone avoided. No one wanted to risk being associated with their downfall. Charles and Mary had tried to find help everywhere, but doors kept closing in their faces. My assistant asked quietly whether we should head to the old residence or the Lu Group first. I chose the company. It was time to seek justice. The Lu family had staged an accident 3 years ago to take everything from me. Now it was time for another accident to happen. The conference room of the Lu Group felt different now. I sat there calmly, watching Mary's desperate face as she rushed toward me. "George, I knew you wouldn't let the company sink," she said, clutching at hope. "The debt collectors are overwhelming us." Her appearance had changed dramatically. Expensive makeup couldn't hide her exhaustion or the dark circles under her eyes. Before she could get too close, my bodyguard stepped between us. I had given strict orders. No one was to come within 3 meters of me. I wouldn't make the mistake of trusting them again. "What's the meaning of this?" Mary demanded, her composure cracking. I smiled at them both, noting how they struggled to hide their hatred while forcing polite smiles. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the room, "I'm here today because my grandfather's birthday is approaching. Just need to collect a small debt. 10 million, nothing more." My assistant pulled out a contract bearing Charles's signature. The executives froze, then erupted in panicked questions. They couldn't understand how I still had power over them after leaving the company's management. But they were about to learn that I had never truly left. Every move over the past 3 years had been carefully calculated, leading to this moment. Their world was about to shatter, piece by carefully arranged piece. The executives explained frantically that the Lu Group was already on its knees. Forced off the stock market, most assets sold to cover debts. They could barely scrape together $10 million, not even enough to cover next month's interest payments. My plan to hollow out the company had worked perfectly, leaving nothing but an empty shell. Mary's face crumpled in despair. "What's really going on, George?" she asked. I met her question with cold disdain, dropping all pretense of warmth. "Let's not play games," I said. "Debts must be paid. Take a good look. There's the Lou Group's official seal and Charles's signature. I can show you the payment records if you need more proof." Mary's hands shook as she examined the document. The color drained from her face as understanding dawned. She snapped her head up, eyes burning with hatred. "You knew everything all along, didn't you? This wasn't just a trap, you planned it all. But why?" I watched her desperation with deep satisfaction, though I kept my face carefully blank and innocent. "I'm just here to collect a debt," I said, blinking in fake confusion. "President Mary, please arrange the payment as soon as possible." Charles's face had turned ashen. He wanted to protest but couldn't find the words. Everything was legally airtight. The shares were in Mary's name, all seals and signatures genuine. Mary trembled with rage, pointing at me but unable to form complete sentences. After a long moment of glaring at me with pure hatred, Charles turned to leave, trying to abandon Mary to deal with the mess alone. After all, she was now the majority shareholder. "Not so fast, cousin," I called out, my voice stopping him in his tracks. "Let's sit down and work this out together." He stared at me, realization slowly dawning in his eyes. "It was you all along, wasn't it?" he finally managed to say. I raised my finger, waving it back and forth with lazy satisfaction. Everything was falling into place exactly as I had planned. The predators had become prey, and they were only beginning to understand the depth of the trap they had walked into. I kept smiling as I explained to Charles how his own executive's greed had been his downfall. 3 years ago, desperate to control the Lou Group, he had distributed too much power among the executives. Lacking real leadership ability, he couldn't rein them back in. He could only watch helplessly as they grew more powerful. The executives, drunk on their newfound authority, began systematically looting the Lou Group's assets. Their method was simple but effective. They created shell companies overseas to funnel money out of the country. The Lou Group, while powerful in New York, had limited international presence. This weakness made their scheme perfect, or so they thought. What they didn't know was that those overseas shell companies were mine. Every dollar they thought they were stealing for themselves had been flowing straight into my accounts. I had spent 3 years watching them dig their own graves, one transaction at a time. Just as Charles and Mary were about to confront me, the police walked in. Perfect timing. I raised my hand quickly. "Officers, I'm the one who filed the report about illegal fund transfers." When they asked about evidence, I couldn't help but smile. "As a law-abiding citizen," I said, "I would never file a false report. In fact, I've prepared everything you'll need for your investigation." I signaled my assistant, who began bringing in 10 large suitcases packed with evidence. The suitcases contained everything: signed agreements between executives and shell companies, transfer records, fake contracts, and detailed documentation of how funds were moved overseas. When spread across hundreds of executives and managers, each person's crimes seemed small. But together, they painted a picture of massive systematic fraud. The police led away the entire middle and upper management of the Lou Group. Mary watched in horror as her empire crumbled. "George, why won't you save the company?" she pleaded. "You've survived worse times. What are you trying to achieve?" I shrugged, tapping the documents in my hand with casual indifference. "I just need the money," I said with a half smile, knowing the simple answer would hurt more than any lengthy explanation. The truth was, I didn't want to save the company. I wanted to watch it burn with all the traitors inside it. I reminded them of my earlier warning about payment. If the money isn't in my account within 30 minutes, I have some interesting evidence about tax evasion. I'm sure you wouldn't want another visit from the police." Mary tried to protest, but Charles stopped her. They paid, and with that final blow, the Liu Group collapsed completely. As I headed for the door, I remembered the real reason for my visit. Turning back, I smiled at Charles. "Dear cousin, don't forget grandfather's birthday banquet today. Your attendance is mandatory. It would be a shame if I accidentally misplaced some of that evidence." The threat hung in the air as I left. At the Liu family residence, I transformed. Gone was the sharp businessman who had just destroyed a company. Instead, I walked in slowly, holding my companion's hand with gentle casualness. The atmosphere inside was thick with tension, more like a funeral than a birthday celebration. Hostile glares followed us as we entered. Mary's composure shattered when she saw who accompanied me. "George, how could you be with Luna?" The irony was delicious. Luna had been Mary's trusted assistant, privy to all her secrets. Now she stood beside me, a living reminder of Mary's betrayal. I patted Luna's arm affectionately, cutting off Mary's outburst. "Who I'm with isn't your concern anymore, Mary. Though I should mention, Luna is my assistant now." Mary's mouth opened, but I waved away her words. There was no need for explanations. Grandfather understood everything, and that was what mattered. Speaking of grandfather, he tried to maintain his patriarchal authority. "George, now that you've recovered, I'll have the Liu Group transferred to you tomorrow. Prepare yourself." His words made me want to laugh. He was trying to save face as family head by passing me Charles's mess, acting as if it was some great gift. Did he really think I'd fall for such an obvious ploy? "Grandfather," I said calmly, "weren't you the one who said I lacked the ability to lead the Liu family? That the company needed new leadership?" I let the words hang in the air, reminding everyone of past betrayals. The time for pretending was over. I smiled at my grandfather. "The group seems to be doing wonderfully under Charles's leadership, don't you think?" My words sent him into a coughing fit, earning a furious glare from Charles's father. Of course they were angry. Whoever controlled the group now would have to deal with its debts. I had drained the last of their liquid assets, leaving only 3 digits in their accounts and a mountain of penalties. They had thought themselves clever, but I wasn't about to let them escape so easily. Grandfather tried to intervene, his voice heavy with false concern. "We're all Liu family descendants, George. There's no need to destroy our century-old foundation over this." His bias was showing again. "I'm sorry, Grandfather, but I won't be taking over the family business," I said firmly. "They've turned it into a hollow shell drowning in debt. Should they avoid jail just because Charles is your favorite?" Grandfather fell silent, but his eyes betrayed his feelings. I couldn't tell if he was mourning the Liu family's bankruptcy or lamenting the failure of his schemes against me. Either way, I didn't care. Charles and his father had been thoroughly defeated. I had successfully ruined my grandfather's birthday dinner, which ended in bitter silence. As my second uncle shot me an angry glare and prepared to leave with his family, I gently guided my grandfather to the second-floor terrace. "Why did you bring me here?" he demanded. I smiled softly, unbothered by his anger. To watch the evening's finale, of course. The Charles family's car had barely traveled 300 meters from the old house when it suddenly spun out of control, crashing into a warehouse. Grandfather clutched his chest, crying out in shock. Everyone around us remained eerily silent. "You monster!" he shouted. "Are you trying to kill your second uncle?" I shook my head, gesturing for him to keep watching. Suddenly, the warehouse erupted in a series of explosions. Fireworks shot into the night sky, their beautiful but cruel display perfectly matching my mood. "Oh, I forgot to mention, Grandfather, that warehouse was storing fireworks." The colors bloomed against the darkness, a celebration of vengeance years in the making. I gestured at the exploding sky. "Consider this my birthday gift to you, Grandfather. Enough fireworks for hundreds of people to enjoy all evening. Quite expensive, but worth it to see you appreciate them." Grandfather clutched his chest, his finger trembling as he pointed at me, teetering on the edge of a heart attack. "Are you still bitter about 3 years ago?" he wheezed. "The investigation proved it was an accident. Why are you doing this?" My laugh was as cold as winter. "Perhaps it's just the result of your negligence. But evidence doesn't matter anymore. My father was your son too, or did you forget that?" When Grandfather tried to speak again, I cut him off with a wave. "You taught me this lesson yourself. Nothing is absolutely right or wrong. The only mistake is not having enough power." Hearing his own words thrown back at him, Grandfather's head dropped, silence his only response. I let out a soft, knowing laugh. "Stop plotting, Grandfather. I know about your illegitimate son. Were you planning to bring him back? Create another accident to send me down to join my parents?" I paused, savoring the moment. "Don't bother. By pure accident, their car fell into the sea right after I landed. Such a tragedy." Grandfather stared at me, his expression a complex mix of fear, respect. I shook my head slowly, looking into her terrified eyes. "Mrs. George, what are you talking about? I simply want to invite you on a vacation. You won't die. After all, someone needs to handle Charles's debts. Just choose your destination." She crawled forward, fear contorting her face. "No, please, I'd rather stay somewhere cool. I won't go anywhere." I gently stroked her face one last time. 3 years of waiting, and this was our final moment. "A cool place? Then you'll need a thick cotton blanket. Mrs. George has made her choice. Southeast Asia it is." 3 days later, after everything was settled, I stood before my parents' grave, holding a bouquet of elegant chrysanthemums. The flowers seemed to glow in the soft morning light, their petals catching drops of dew. "Mom, Dad," I whispered, placing the flowers carefully. "I've avenged our family. You can rest peacefully now." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away 3 years of pain, betrayal, and carefully planned revenge. It was finally over.